Hello, everybody. It is January the 3rd, 2015, coming to you live from Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is the podcast Into the Fire, True Crime Stories, coming to you live from KGRA Digital Broadcasting out of Utah. Welcome to everybody. We're still working on a few technical difficulties, so some of you may not actually be coming in directly live with us, but we're working on that. And if not, this will be put on Rumble, Facebook, and every other platform that we use, such as Spotify, Apple, etc. But you may not be able to get in here just live, and we're working on it. Sorry for that. Our director is not exactly at the house right this minute, so we're working on it. Tonight's going to be a really interesting night. We're going to have a special guest that I don't know that we're going to be able to confine this to just one episode. It may actually be more than one. And we'll just kind of have to sort that out. This guy's a wealth of knowledge. I want to wish everybody a happy new year. Hopefully, God, what a start to the new year with that drama that happened in New Orleans. That's just sickening. Hopefully we're not going to have a lot more of that jazz going on in the world, but just a horrible event. Our hearts go out to all of the victims and their families and etc. That's just really, really horrible. And I just hope that people are, we just don't have a world of crazy coming our way. But anyway, it's good to be here. I'm honored to be here. And hopefully we're going to have a really good show. This guy that we're going to bring on tonight is going to be Mike Elam. And I don't want to waste a lot of time just sitting in here chattering. But I'm going to start out with this guy's bio. Mike Elam served as a deputy sheriff in Benton County, Arkansas under Sheriffs Jack Saxon and Andy Lee. Sheriff Lee wanted to promote him to the position of criminal investigator. However, Elam chose to work in the private sector as the income was much better, and that is the truth. With two sons, he had to think about their future and the cost of their college educations. This situation prompted him to take a job as the director of human resources for a regional grocery retailer. As the company grew, he later took on the task of developing the company's loss prevention and asset protection programs, and Sam Walton later purchased this company. I don't know if that's Walmart that he's speaking of, but I don't know. Maybe he can talk about that later. As director of loss prevention and asset protection, he oversaw uniformed and plainclothes security personnel and 3 investigators. Due to the nature of his position, he maintained working relationships with members of the law enforcement community. And as for Bufford Pusser, Elam was getting into law enforcement about the time Pusser had lost his race for sheriff of McNairy County, Tennessee. And as a huge fan of the former sheriff, after seeing the movie Walking Tall and its sequels, Elam wondered why such a dynamic force in law enforcement wasn't reelected in 1972. For the last 20 years, he has searched for the answer. He obtained photos, documents from the FBI, documents, FBI reports, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation correspondence, and even an autopsy report of one of the people that Sheriff Pusser had killed. He first started interviewing people with a negative view of Bufford. He interviewed people with connections to the state line, moonshiners, bootleggers, and others who were not all affiliated with the state line. And we're talking about the state line of Mississippi and Tennessee. He then began interviewing former sheriffs, deputies, and Bufford's friends and relatives. Pauline happened to be Bufford's wife, so he had interviewed Pauline's friends and relatives, newspaper reporters, and former state medical examiner, and Bufford's personal attorney. All of these people had played own roles in Bufford's story, and Elam learned that their memories of Sheriff Pusser, regardless of which side of the story they came from, seemed more alike than different. In 2020, he wrote a book, Bufford Pusser, The Other Side, available at Amazon.com and eBay, and we're going to give you the sites for that. Is actually you buy that book directly from Mike, and later started the YouTube channel by the same name. The attention these brought to Bufford's story resulted in even more leads that Elam continues to investigate, and these leads led the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation reopening the cold case in the murder of Pauline Pusser. He is working on a second book about what he has learned since publishing the first book, which will be released soon. I currently don't have the book, but I want to bring Mike Elam on the show. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And man, listen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. And I'm going to tell you something. I have to give a lot of credit to Danny Couples. And I know that you know Danny. I've known Danny for many, many years. And Danny, there's Danny right there. And just for the listeners, you may remember Danny. Danny actually nope, that's not Danny. That's the last guest from the other one. But Danny was the one that the EMT that you'd had on there, the first one. Danny, actually, I've known him way back. He and I have spent 3 different times in New York City training there, and we just stayed close. I don't know why, but he and I just kind of stayed connected throughout the years. And one of the things that he had told me when I'd happened to mention something about where he was living in Tennessee, I'd happened to actually ask him. I was like, "Hey, have you ever been to where McNairy County, Tennessee?" He goes, "No, I live in Eastern Tennessee now." Or he said, he didn't say no. He's been there. As a matter of fact, he rode in Sheriff Pusser's car. I think we're running live now, so I can get off of this Facebook. All right. So he actually rode in Sheriff Pusser's car as a kid. And then actually, I think his grandmother was really good friends with Sheriff Pusser, too. I'll let him talk about that later. But he definitely knew her, or his family knew Sheriff Pusser. So that's why we're here. That's why I reached out to you, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you.
I appreciate you having me on again.
So let's start off with, I just want to kind of remind people about the story. And Amanda, if you wouldn't mind showing up that little video from YouTube real quick, just to remind viewers as to Walking Tall.
When was the last time you stood up and applauded a movie? Audiences across America are standing up, applauding, and cheering a film called Walking Tall.
I thought you walked tall, because you gotta learn how to crawl. You let them do this to me and get away with it, and you give them the eternal right to do the same damn thing to any one of you.
Walking Tall. It's a deeply moving contemporary film based on the true story of a young man who wouldn't surrender to the system, and the girl who always stood beside him.
You gambled your life. And no one has come to say thank you.
Maybe nobody really does give a damn.
It's the picture your neighbors are talking about. It has been called the best American movie of the year. Join the audiences applauding Walking Tall, rated R.
Yeah, I watched this movie on MGM Plus. That you can actually stream it on there right now if you remember that. And 1973 is when the first movie came out. So tell us a little bit about, and that's going to be one from like 78 or 79. And then that was a TV show. Actually, there was a TV show that I didn't even know about that. And then most recently, 2004 with The Rock, which was not really about Pusser. It was kind of based on the story, I think, is more like it. But
That's
so
correct.
tell us a little bit about how you ended up getting interested in this whole story and how it took off from there.
Well, if you can imagine, I was a young law enforcement officer back in those days when Bufford was about to get out of law enforcement. I was getting into it. And of course, the movie came out in 73. I saw it and thought it was a fantastic story. And I just wanted to learn more about Bufford. And of course, it was difficult at first because you had all these True Detective magazines and all this that really followed the movie rather than his real story. And his real story was what I was after. Well, with the internet coming along in the 90s, I began to research him through that. There wasn't much there at first, but I kept digging and eventually, found people over there in McNairy County that I could get in touch with, ask questions, and that led me to a lot of interesting interviews with people who played their own part in the real story.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of them is probably, I know that his son will probably be tuning into this, and that's Dennis Hathcock and his dad. Yeah. I noticed that he had commented on one of the things, and he's somebody that you've had on your podcast, actually.
Oh, I've had him on here several times. Yes.
Yeah. And his dad was portrayed as somewhat of a villain in the movie Walking Tall. And actually, when I heard about your podcast originally, and that's what I really encourage people to check out, and it's Bufford Pusser, The Other Side. And
The other story.
or The Other Story. I'm sorry. Thank you. And when you tune in there, basically, man, you could sit there for hours and hours and hours. And literally, it's fascinating the amount of work and research that you have put into this story. It's tremendous. And what you've learned is, really, what did you start learning about Bufford? You said that the stories were somewhat consistent. What was those stories that were starting to come out about him?
Well, what got me was I inadvertently met Dennis online. We both happened to be on a website called Firing Line one night. Everybody just gets on there to discuss firearms. And there were a lot of law enforcement people on there, for instance. And someone brought up a little 25 caliber semi-automatic handgun and someone else said, well, that's the kind that Pauline Pusser used to carry. And as soon as they mentioned the word Pusser, well, all this chatter started about what a great sheriff he was and everything. Well, by that time, I'd learned enough to know that a lot of his story was really fictional. And so, I started to try to explain that, guys, that was just a movie. The real story is nothing like that. Of course, some of them were willing to listen, others were not. I was a bad guy for even bringing that up. And a little while later, I got a phone call, and it was Dennis. And he asked me, he says, well, I'd like to know where you got all your information. And I told him, well, I was just going out there and exploring like anybody else would if they're interested. And he made the comment, he said, well, you've got it just about as much right as anybody I've ever spoken with. And I interviewed him every night for like the next 3 weeks. Finally decided I needed to just go over there and meet him. And when I did, much to my surprise, he wanted to introduce me to some people. And oddly, they were mostly from the law enforcement side of the story, which I thought was strange. I stayed with his best friend, who happened to be Jim Moffitt, who was Bufford's chief deputy. It was his son. And I thought, man, this is odd. You got the son of this evil villain in Walking Tall and the son of Bufford's chief deputy, and they're best friends. And then the more I got to interviewing people from both sides of the story, the more you learn that all of them pretty much held a very similar view. So it was quite eye-opening to me. I, at one point, almost got so discouraged in finding out that Bufford was not the person we all think he was, that I almost quit researching the story. And then it dawned on me that, everyone in this story, doesn't matter who you speak of, they all have an interesting story of their own, whether it's Bufford, his dad, his mom, Pauline, any of the state liners that you want to bring up, they all had interesting stories. So I kind of got in on that, and that's when I started to really put things together. And then in 2020, I had to have cancer surgery. And as such, that was about the time COVID hit. So it was pretty much a death sentence for me to be around people. If I got COVID, I might not make it. And that's when a lot of people encouraged me to start writing a book. So I did.
Yeah. And Amanda, throw that book up there right quick. This book here is you can get it, and actually, I noticed on there that they buy it. I'm gonna get one from you. I noticed that they actually buy that straight from you. Is that right?
Yeah, I have it on both Amazon and eBay, okay. But I process the orders. So some days that gets to be a lot of work.
Oh, I'm sure well, that's a good thing though. That's a good thing to have a problem with, right?
I'm not complaining.
If you see my name come through there, which you should, I want you to write something in the front of it, like sign your name. That'd be great.
Well, I plan to send you a copy anyway. So.
Well, I appreciate that. Listen, the thing about Bufford, from what I kind of, I watched Walking Tall again. I watched the 1973 version of it, and I've seen that movie. It's just one of those movies that I can remember growing up, that if that thing was on TV, it was on. You know what I mean? It was just always on. And I loved that movie. It was great. And when the more and more I've listened to your podcast and the evidence and the stuff that you've brought forward, it couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, it's not even close to what really happened. And I'm just kind of fascinated as to how in the heck did this thing even attract the interest of Hollywood to begin with? I mean, what was it about him and this story that really started all of that?
Well, basically, it actually all started with a rockabilly singer named Eddie Bond. He was in Memphis. He had heard about Buford, and he started recording songs about him. For instance, Bear Hunting with a Switch. And regionally, they were popular songs. Now, Eddie Bond was, from the Elvis era. And, they knew each other, all this. But when Elvis went one direction, Eddie Bond kind of went another. At any rate, all those records going out there locally and regionally made Buford kind of a hero. And so then a writer, W.R. Morris, who worked for a newspaper there in Memphis, he and Eddie Bond were friends. And Bond told him, you ought to go over there and see about doing a book with Buford, about Buford. And he did. He was under contract with Buford. I think that Morris pretty much had to write it the way that Buford told him, since it was under a contract and it was supposed to be Buford's biography. And that's where the legend got started, because Buford made some claims that nobody can seem to validate.
Yeah. And it says that at the end of the movie that he was the consultant on the project. So it was kind of amusing after the whole movie, because I didn't honestly know that he was still alive. I didn't even pay attention to that until after I've spoke to you and so forth. So he, of course, was alive. He was the sheriff of McNairy County from 1964 to 1970. And then he became the constable of a town. And explain that to me. How did he become a constable, and what was his job there?
Actually, he came down from Chicago, where he had worked up there, met Pauline, returned home. And part of the story was that you'll hear is that Buford took his dad's place as chief of police in Adamsville when he returned. And this was in 1961, 1962. Well, the only thing is that part of the legend is, I find to be false, because Carl was in a car accident in 1957, injured his hip, and he had to leave police work. And there were others that served as chief of police before Buford got there. Well, when Buford arrived in 61, he took a job as a patrolman in Adamsville. And then when Buford Surratt, who was the chief of police at the time, whenever he decided to leave that position, well, Buford just stepped into his place. So you hear a lot of stories about how that Buford took his dad's place. Not really true. And then while he was chief of police in Adamsville, he decided to run for to be a constable as well, because the two positions didn't really interfere with each other. So he was a constable for the 3rd Judicial District there in McNairy County. In 1964, the Republicans, they had James Dickey, the incumbent, who was going to be sheriff. And he was killed in a car wreck. At any rate, Buford ran against an independent and named George Weatherford. So the real race was between he and George Weatherford. And Weatherford, we never heard about in the movie. You didn't really hear much about him in the books. But Buford, I think, defeated him by something like 288 votes in that election. And, others would write that Buford barely beat a dead sheriff and James Dickey, but Dickey only got 307 votes total. So, the whole story is just flawed from the very get-go.
So the story goes from there. I think that it's safe to say that based on the stuff that you've uncovered is that Buford was kind of walking a little bit of both sides of the law. And
He was.
I mean, there's no doubt he probably had somewhat of a positive impact. I don't want to, at times, I mean, is that fair to say?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he was arresting some bad guys here and there, but he was also doing some things, from what it sounds like to me, that maybe he was he was getting protection money in essence, something like that.
Yeah, if you go back even before that he was chief of police, though, is when you first saw him getting into the dark side of the law. Because I think we've all seen the scene in the movie where that he goes into a club with his friend Ludi McVeigh, and Buford is beaten, cut up, thrown out, and left for dead. And that was at the Plantation Club where Dennis Hathcock's father, W.O., owned the club. And you cannot find any resource that says that ever happened. Now, in the movie, they showed him as having his chest cut up. Morse's book said that he got 192 stitches in his face and his forehead, but yet I've brought the subject up many, many times looking for anyone that can verify this. There's no photographs. There's no medical reports to show that ever had to endure that. There's no police reports. And, you would think, that if his father had been chief of police at one time, that he would have made sure that Buford got some justice had that happened. And you'd also think that with Adamsville being a small town, only about 1,000 people back then, that somebody would have some form of evidence or even memories of seeing Buford walking around with a head full of stitches, but nothing.
Well, I mean, well, since you say that, actually, based on that entire incident, was there not any reports of him going to that club and demanding money? I mean, didn't they kind of come at him like maybe he did a robbery or something like that?
Well, he was in there allegedly and accused someone of cheating at a dice game. Now, the thing that you have to remember is there at the state line, there was no syndicate. Those clubs were not in a syndicate. If anything, they were competitors, and they would burn each other's place down just to get a bigger market share. Now, allegedly, Buford accused somebody of cheating, and that's the reason that he took this alleged beating. Well, you can't find any proof that happened, but in December of 1959, just about a week after he married Pauline, he and two others came back down to the state line area. Marvin King Jr. and Jerry Wright, they all worked at the Union Bag Company in Chicago. All of them had moved up there because down south there was nothing. Good paying jobs were in Chicago. And at any rate, they came back down here, middle of the night, early one morning. They go in, and it's nothing like we saw in the movies where there's this big fight and Buford's in the middle of it. All of that happened, and it was just the three of them against W.O. Hathcock. Mm-hmm. And they darn near killed him. Well, they returned to Chicago, and allegedly a constable named Cleveland Marler found a laundry marker that was left on the dance floor at this club and managed to trace that back down to one of the three gentlemen, I'm not sure which. And as a result, Chicago police arrested all of them, and then they were transported back down to Alcorn County, Mississippi, there in Corinth, to stand trial for the robbery of the Plantation Club, where they had taken over $1,000, which in today's money, that would be like $10,000.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And so I'm trying to pass along a little bit of information to some of these followers that listen to us from all over the world that are, my phone's blowing up over here, and we had some technical difficulties. So I apologize for that. That happens sometimes. Sometimes it happens due to weather somewhere in the world or in the country. But Amanda, who's behind the curtain, is working really hard to try to rectify that. Mike, I want to make sure that we have a time to touch upon this. So he stays in office for 6 years, and that's a long time. Did he have pretty much the same deputies that would stick with him? Or, there was that one deputy that they made look like he was basically sharing information about him and his efforts to try to close some of these places down or to attack the moonshining or whatever. Is there any truth to that at all?
There's nothing that I can find. He basically had two paid deputies, an individual named P.D. Plunk, and then his chief deputy, Jim Moffett. And then Buford had all kinds of special deputies, basically ones that would carry a card, but that was about it. And then they often relied on the constables from these various judicial districts for assistance. McNairy County was only 25,000 people now. Back then it was only 18,000. So the county could not afford, a large sheriff's office.
Yeah, and I will mention something. I happened to read just recently, and I don't know if you told me this, Mike, or not, but they did lose an officer in the line of duty, Rick Finley, in McNairy County, just literally a couple of weeks ago. And
it was really a sad thing.
What happened on that deal? Just out of curiosity, if you know.
Basically, as I understand it, he was a McNairy County deputy, but at the time he was doing some work for Selmer PD. They had a call about a disturbance of some type there in Selmer. He responded to it, and the guy somehow managed to get the drop on him and shot and killed him. Yeah, and then he in turn was shot and killed by the backup officer. But it was really a sad set of circumstances. It's bad anytime you lose an officer.
Absolutely. So this, have you talked to a lot of the deputies or any of the deputies that were under Pusser at the time from back in the day? And if so, what did they say about him?
You have to understand that over there, everyone is so divided on this story. For instance, if you're from Adamsville, a lot of the people over there are very pro Pusser. If you're from Selmer, they can go either way. And having said that, what you have to understand is that a lot of people are really reluctant to speak about what they know, because with it being such a small community, I mean, it's like I was told one day by an individual that was close to the story. Said, if you want to start an argument at Thanksgiving dinner, all you have to do at our household is bring up Bufford Pusser, because half the family loved him, half the family thought he was a crook. And he said, if you're not careful, everybody gets up and goes home if you start to discuss it. So it's that way with the deputies. It seems like the ones that I have talked to, I've only spoken with 3, because, like I say, back then there weren't hardly any.
Yeah.
And they all kind of have selective memories because of this situation. They don't want to say too much one way or the other. They just kind of take the middle of the road.
Because they live there. I mean,
Well,
I would assume, they still live there, or if they haven't died, but they probably don't want to be ostracized because he's a legend in the state of Tennessee.
Absolutely.
Still to this day. I haven't been to McNairy County. I will definitely make a point to run through there, because it's, it's not that far off of I-40, actually. I don't think. And
No,
I will certainly, if I'm ever that way, I mean, I want to check it out. I would like to check out the museum. But so there's something that came up, and this is the thing I really wanted to get into a little bit that I think is really fascinating, and I think a lot of people will find this fascinating. Now, first of all, what's the claim that he's been shot? Like, is it 8 separate times, or just 8 different bullet holes in him over the course of his career?
different bullet holes. They're
Okay.
For instance, he was shot at one time the day that he killed Louise Hathcock. Another time, he was allegedly shot 4 times when he made a traffic stop. That was shown in the movie.
Okay.
Well,
wait, you said allegedly. But on that particular situation, I mean, did it? What is your thoughts on that, or what have you kind of uncovered or learned?
Well, you take a guy that is 6'6" and 250 pounds. All of his wounds, except for the one from the alleged ambush, were basically non-serious. Like in that one, when he was shot 4 times, he claimed that one grazed his stomach, one grazed his arm, and the other 2 went through his cheek. And don't know if they went in through his mouth and came out the side, or went in the side and came out the mouth. But his teeth, gums, tongue, nothing was torn apart, wounded in any way.
Uh-huh.
So you had that one. Then he claimed that after the ambush, for instance, he claimed that a guy named Russ Hamilton, that he went to a disturbance, and that Hamilton pulled a gun, fired a couple of shots at him, and one grazed his stomach, that he didn't even have a doctor take a look at because it was such a superficial wound. Then he was stabbed 7 times, and I believe that was on 2 occasions, as far as you can really make it out. One was when he picked up a hitchhiker, and he was, according to Bufford, going to give him a meal and let him spend a night in the jail in a bed. And in turn, the guy pulled a knife and tried to stab him in the chest. Those were basically not even close to life-threatening. And it was another one was when he tried to stop a car that he thought was hauling moonshine, and he claimed he got on the hood of the car. The guy that was driving was stabbing him in the arm with a knife. The lady that was sitting in the passenger seat was hitting him with a wrench. I interviewed the coroner over there, a guy named Ward Moore, and he said, I was there that day, and said he was indeed on the hood of that car, but he said there wasn't any action like the knife or the wrench that he saw. So there you have that. So all of those, when you say that he was shot 8 times and stabbed 7 times, the only really serious wound he had was to his chin during the ambush.
And when you're talking about the ambush that basically cost Pauline Pusser ended up dying. Is that the one you're speaking of? Okay, so in that specific, that's where I really want to get into too, because in that specific situation, and that's clearly in the movie, the 1973 movie, and in that movie, basically, he has a call. He gets a call to his house, and he's going out. I think it was a burglary, if I'm not mistaken, but he's going out there to go deal with this burglary situation, and his wife is going to she's going to go on a ride along with him, just to see what his job's all about, etc. And while they're driving down the road, that's of course when a couple of cars come out from behind a building, and they come up alongside of him. And of course, the people that are in the cars, the way that they're portrayed, it's Hathcock, and it's I'm thinking that's who it is, right? Mr. Hathcock is one of them, and then there's the other bar owners or people that are involved in the bars. Not the female, because he had killed her in the bar at that one bar. But my point is that in the midst of this ambush, that's when his wife ends up getting shot and killed. And the reason why this is really significant today is because not only because you've been so involved in just going out and interviewing these people, but based on a lot of your efforts and so forth, that's what's kind of prompted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to look into that case. And actually, they exhumed her body. And that's 56 or 57 years later after this incident, they actually exhumed her body. Amanda, throw up a couple of there's the gravesite, 56 years, and then the picture of the casket. That's, to me, is fascinating. Something I've never been a part of as a homicide detective. What have you heard, or if you even have, but have you heard like what the condition of her body was? And I know that they're still under investigation and they're probably not going to speak on it, but
no, they're not speaking on it. All I can tell you is that if you look at the photographs, of her exhumation, you see that her casket was in a concrete vault. So I would suspect that she was fairly well preserved, which should really, as you know, help in them finding things. I was a little amazed when I started checking in this story that an autopsy had never been done.
Really?
Had not been performed. And I thought that was strange because Louise Hathcock, the bar owner that you speak of, now they did one on her. And it could be that through that experience, they decided not to go down that road again because Louise was shot from the posterior side twice. Before she was shot in the head as she lay on the floor. One bullet went through her upper shoulder, exited out the front. The other one was right near her left shoulder blade and exited under her right breast. And of course, you didn't know that until you saw the autopsy report. And I don't think anybody had seen it in probably 30 years. When we finally got a hold of that. And then you find out that Pauline is killed and there's no autopsy. Why would you do one on a bar owner but not do one on a sheriff's wife? That made no sense.
Yeah.
And,
well, has there been, I'm sure the media has been questioning TBI if there's been any kind of an update in reference to that case. And I would think that'd be a hot news item for Tennessee at least.
It has been, but the TBI in the early to mid '80s, they came under a new protocol, new state laws that prohibit them from sharing the files that they have. So they just keep quiet on everything. They're not afraid to ask you questions, but they don't want to answer any.
Yeah.
So I've tried to get some information out of them, but it hasn't worked well. So I can only tell you what I can see from what I know that, or at least suspect that they have done. And but I know that.
Let me ask you this. So in reference to that specific shooting, and I like that shooting because that's the one that's currently in the events and so forth. I would think that they would have done. The world of forensics today is extraordinary compared to what it was back then. I mean, it's not even in the same, galaxy. So I would think that there was cartridge casings from that particular situation. And I'm wondering, was there ever any idea if that has ever matched to any gun, if there've ever been any guns discovered in reference to that specific deal or anything along those lines?
All I can say about that is that, when I got interested in this, I started a Facebook page called Bufford Pusser, The Other Story, just like my book, just like the YouTube channel. And it was for the purpose of getting to know some of these people and being able to reach out to them. And a lot of them have shared information. And one day after, I want to say it was like 6 years, I had this individual contact me and say, I think I may have the gun that was used in the ambush. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I've heard this story at least probably a dozen times. But I always ask because you never know when you're finally going to get, a real lead.
Yeah.
And this individual gave me the background about how they obtained it, quite a bit about its history, so on and so forth. And they just checked off a lot of the boxes for me. So it's 465 miles from my home to the area over there. But I got in the car, drove over there, took some photographs of the weapon. Of course, got the serial number, and so I could learn where it was made, kind of get a history on it. Did some checking and found out it was a World War II era M1 carbine. That it was made in Grand Rapids by the Saginaw Gear Company. And so I posted about it on my Facebook page because nobody else has seemed interested in all of this. Well, then before long, I talked to the person that owned the gun and said, what do you think about if we contact the TBI about this? And he agreed. And a little bit later, they were calling and wanting to know what else I knew. So I've shared a lot of information with them, but they have yet to share much with me. So,
well, I would think that there's just not a lot of carbines hanging around in people's houses. I've been a cop for 26 years, and I can't remember running across one of those on a search warrant. I'm not saying that I'm not a gun guy, but I just don't remember running across one of those on the many search warrants I've been involved in. So I would think that would be a pretty, apparently it had to have matched the type of calibers, at least from what has been publicized.
The thing that got me about the gun that I can say is that, ironically, Jim Moffat's son, O'Neill, the one that I met over there, he had been in the Air Force back in those days. And one night, I was spending some time with him over there, and I saw him one night going through some files that I had, and he kind of put them away when he saw that I was awake. And I said, no, go ahead and go through those files. There's nothing in there that is a big secret. And we got to talking about things, and he told me, he said that when he was in the Air Force, they were getting rid of the M1s. And he said, when we were told that they were going to dispose of them, he said, I just hated to see all those guns go to be disposed of in any way, melted down, whatever they're going to do with them. And he said, I had no idea that they would give them to other friendly countries or sell them in surplus stores or whatever. But he said, so a friend of mine and I relieved the Air Force of several of those. And he apparently, Buford got a number of them. So,
oh, really? All right.
So on this,
it certainly introduced some of them to the community. I mean, he had some.
Well, he was taking them home to McNairy County and selling them. And he told me that Buford had more than one. How many? I don't know. But at any rate,
this is really a huge. This whole story that you've told, and Mike, I think that anybody, and I encourage somebody go to watch his YouTube videos, buy his book, look at his book. If you're interested in a book, this would be a great one to start with. Probably more applicable to the general citizen as opposed to the last guest from last week. Ed's book is for fire investigators, and homicide guys. This is a history. This story has been part of the fabric of this country since the 70s. Really, I think it was really that big of a deal. I think it was almost one of the biggest movies of 1973. At least I saw some videos of that. It was huge. And so this is one of those deals. If you go to his Facebook page, which he has a mother load of photos, go to his YouTube page and just start watching a couple of the videos. And I think you're going to see what I'm talking about and checking those out. And from there, let me ask you, because there's one thing, what about his kids? I know one of his daughters died not too long ago. I don't remember the year and I can't remember her name.
He actually only had Dewana. That was
okay.
His biological child. in the movie, you saw Mike, which was his stepson through Pauline's previous marriage to Pete Vance, and Pete and Pauline also had Diana, and Diana passed away about 10 years ago. Mike passed away a few years back, and then of course, unfortunately, Dewana took her own life here about 3 years ago.
I did not know that. All right, because they really didn't get into that. So, so none of the kids are still alive.
No.
And what did you ever get a chance to meet any of the kids in your, your years?
I met Dewana, of course, and then I know to some degree Mike's son, Michael, and I know Diane's children, and I've stayed in contact with them over the past year or so.
Okay, so you have a decent relationship with them.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. All right. So have they? What do they think? I mean, what do they think about? They want to know what happened. Okay, so they're more interested in they want the truth. They're not interested in they're interested in wherever that truth is going to lead them, not necessarily if it's not the legend that he's been portrayed to be. They just want to know what happened to their mom and or their grandmother, and I think that's admirable.
That is the important thing to them.
Now, do they still live in the area?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They're within, say 30, 40 miles of Selmer. So they're still in that area. Yes.
Yeah. I just think, that's, first of all, I have mad respect for you just for simply, at least exploring and because I know that this has not been an easy journey. Just the amount of time that you have spent with going out there and going to McNairy County and just that uncomfortable moments that there's no doubt that you've had those when you're going up and just talking to people because they're like, well, who are you? And what are you here for? And what do you want to know for? That kind of a thing. I have no doubt that you've encountered that. And then on top of it, you've actually had death threats over the years, right?
Correct.
And which side is that coming from? I mean, you're clearly okay with the Hathcocks because with Dennis and so forth.
It comes from Pusser fans, not Pusser's family. It's just that there are some people who are so entrenched in the legend that it is true that whenever you try to tell what it seems really happened, they don't want to hear it. And, for instance, I had one individual who had been a police officer, was sending messages that he knew where I lived. He could show up on my doorstep at any time. I'd never see him coming. And then he posted where my wife worked, where my kids worked, where my grandchildren went to school. He'd done some research and made some threats. Wow. But it's been a while since there's been any. I think people are beginning to see that the legend isn't what it's cracked up to be, and a lot of mellowed.
You are in the process of writing a second book to basically.
It's going to be about what I have learned about the ambush itself.
Okay.
And because there's so much there. For instance, if you watch any of the videos, I've got one called "In the Dark," which is basically one where I attempt to drive down the road. Now, the thing that confused people is in the movie Walking Tall, they showed the ambush is taking place during daylight hours. The TBI initially established the time as being 4:45 a.m. and it was dark. So I tried going down the same path as Bufford alleged that the ambush party chased him down and did it with no headlights, like he claimed that they did. I had to turn on my park lights on my vehicle just to make sure I didn't run off the road, and couldn't hit any speed at all. Bufford claimed in various times that he was going something like 45, 50 miles an hour. We tried the first time in, I think it was 2006, to reconstruct that. We couldn't make it work out during the daylight when the Cadillac could have some speed. When I tried to do that this past year, in similar conditions to what Bufford had that morning, the highest I could get up to was 32 miles an hour. So obviously, if he was going 45, 50 miles an hour, as he claimed to be, there's no way I was going to catch him in 0.7 of a mile. The other thing that got me about all that is the location where that he said they chased him from. You have no idea how that an ambush party would know that he would take that route, because it involved so many convoluted country roads. A lot of them back then were unimproved. When he lived 2 blocks from Highway 64, and he could have got on 64, gone down to Selmer, turned left, been to the state line area on 45 a lot faster than he could have by taking the route that he took. So it's kind of like, if you're an ambush party, what makes you think he's going to go on all these old county roads?
Yeah. And we've got about a minute and 50 seconds left. And I want to ask you 2 questions in that, and hopefully we can get them both in. But one of them is, Bufford ended up dying. He died in a single car accident, probably intoxicated. My alcohol might have played a factor into that, right? There's that. Yeah, 0.18. And since we're on this real quick, I don't have the other picture of his car, but you can find it online. It's actually located inside of the museum that's located in McNairy County. But wasn't it a Corvette? Isn't that what that was? Yeah. So that happened, I believe, in what, 19? You said he was what, 0.08? Is that what you said?
1974. He was 0.18.
Okay.
Yeah.
0.18. All right. So he was triple the legal. He was over double the legal limit, and driving pretty fast, etc. But he had a reputation for having a lead foot, and then but you don't think that there's anything like it was a suicidal deal. It was probably more alcohol related, etc. Didn't he leave from the fair? Isn't that what was going on?
The trooper that investigated it, the accident, said it was too much speed, too much car, and too much alcohol.
Okay. And then and he was only 37 years old, which is crazy. What a tragic.
Sad to die so young.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I was going to mention real quick, and there's a picture of Bufford right there. So he really did carry a big stick. That was part of his thing. Did he carry? Oh, he didn't. Okay.
Never used a big stick. The only time that he was alleged to have used one, he was going to try to take down some moonshiners, and there were 6 of them, and he grabbed a fence post, is what the actual legend is. Okay. And that was the only time he used anything like that.
Well, listen, Mike, you have plans to do other things. It's the book. Maybe there'll be other things coming out in the near future.
Hopefully.
I do too. I really do. I'm a huge fan of yours, Mike. I think that we got to get off here pretty quick, but I wanted to tell you that, man, I'm a fan, and there's many more people just like me that are throughout this country that you don't even know about that are fan. Well, you got 19,000 people following your Facebook page. That's pretty freaking good right there. And that's just those that are following you. There's a lot of other people that are actually tuning in and checking out what you come up with. And I think you've done a really good, to me, it seems like a really ethical and genuine investigation that you're trying to base that on the truth, and you're going where the truth takes you. And so I just want to tell you,
in the book, truth has no agenda.
That's right. And I love that. Truth has no agenda, and you've got that written on your book. And listen, go out and buy his book. We've got to get off of here. I'm gonna try to get you to come back on later on down the line where we can really dive into a whole other section that I'm gonna let you pick, because you know what's good and what's not. But Mike, thanks a lot for being on. I really, really appreciate you, and I hope to have you back in the future. Buy his book. Check out all of his sites, etc. Go ahead if you got something to say real quick.
Oh, just I appreciate you having me on. Be glad to come back if there's anything that you would like to discuss
Absolutely.
about it.
This was episode number 35. We're sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully we'll get those ironed out in the future. Next week, episode number 36. It's going to be Bianca Becker. She's a sex crimes investigator for the University of Central Florida. And we'll have her on, and she's going to talk about therapy dogs and sex crimes investigations, hopefully. And that's what we're going to get into. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for blowing my phone up for the technical difficulties, wanting to tune in. And that means that you really want to be here. So hopefully we'll get this ironed out. Next time we'll have it all squared away. Thanks again, Mike. We'll see you the next time. Everybody, take care, be safe, and we'll catch you next Friday. Take us out, Amanda.